radio, just a couple of other comments on Senator-elect Rand Paul. Obviously, the 2 points where Ron Paul, his father, had done an important public service and continues to do so on the question of opposing the military adventures of the Bush-Cheney regime, anti-war and anti-dictatorship, anti-totalitarianism. There will be the question of reauthorizing and continuing the Guantanamo camp. I think during Rand Paul's Republican primary, he had conceded, he'd made some concessions on the Guantanamo issue to, I believe, his Republican opponent at that time, and of course we'll be eagerly watching to see whether he turns against that question, whether he proposes the repeal of the Patriot Act, and so forth. And then the question of war, where this is where Ron Paul had done yeoman service. Certainly everybody would have to concede that. We had Justin, the guy who writes for anti-war, right? The anti-war lead writer, writing about contacts between Rand Paul and William Kristol of the Weekly Standard. And, of course, in some ways this is possibly understandable that the neocons, the William Kristol group around the Weekly Standard, the hardcore neocons, had tried to derail Rand Paul back in his primaries. And this, it's certainly possible to go and try to neutralize an enemy, right, to turn an active enemy into a drifting enemy if you can. But this will all now come out in concrete votes on war appropriations and things of this sort. So all of that we'll be eagerly watching to see what comes out. Generally speaking, the House Republicans now, who have been elected under the aegis of the so-called Tea Party, and again, it's really a misnomer, their overwhelming orientation in foreign policy is that they're warmongers, and this will obviously create a huge contradiction, right, that the deficit that they're so concerned about turns out to be stoked to a very significant degree by foreign military adventures. And there's a body of opinion which is now growing that the Tea Party, essentially the Tea Party Republicans, or the Republican Tea Party, essentially is now the party of endless war. And if you watch the time of the election, whenever a Tea Party candidate was asked, well, what do you say about Afghanistan and Iraq? These were not frequent questions, but they did come up. They would always either refuse to answer or say what Bush said, which is that the generals have to make the policy. Well, unfortunately, no. The president, with the advice and consent, and above all funding of the Congress, has got to make these decisions. This is not an abstract question. Here in the D.C. area, we've had 5 shootings at U.S. Marine Corps facilities. This takes us back to the D.C. sniper of October 2002. The only difference is nobody's been killed so far. We've had the D.C. subway bomber, obvious case of entrapment, obvious mental deficient who was approached in an FBI sting operation, and now we've got this series of packages. Let me point out, we have conflicting reports about the package bombs, right? Are they bombs? Are they not? Nobody seems to know. There's no real verification about this, right? We just have what one government says, another government says. Notice, however, that what we may have here in the Greek part of it, right? A lot of these package bombs come from Greece or involve Greece in some way. This may be a Greek internal strategy of tension done by the NATO forces in Greece, similar to Italy 1969. In other words, it's an election coming up, right? The Papandreou socialists, if that's what you call them, are certainly vulnerable because they've been carrying water for the Wall Street and London banks. Unbelievable austerity program by Papandreou. And in the middle of that, you get a bunch of terror actions going on. That's the way you break a strike wave. That's the way you set up a situation of knocking the labor movement on the defensive. And remember, if you look in the 9/11 synthetic terror made in USA, you'll see the tradition in Greece is that the terrorist groups are run directly out of the Interior Ministry, and that's just a notorious fact. Not an abstract issue here, because you've also got this amazing column by David Broder. Here we are, Sunday, October 31st, Halloween. The war recovery, and he talks about what's Obama's strategy now for the next 2 years. What else might affect the economy? The answer is obvious, and its implications are frightening. War and peace influence the economy. This is where Obama is likely to prevail, with strong Republican support in Congress for challenging Iran's ambition to become a nuclear power. He can spend much of 2011, 2012 orchestrating a showdown with the mullahs. This will help him politically because the opposition party will be urging him on. As tensions rise and we accelerate preparations for war, the economy will improve. This is absolute insanity. Just a couple of, so therefore this danger, very, very real, always very real. In terms of our nation, right, this derelict adrift on the ocean of adventures, in the New York Times on Tuesday, November 2nd, we find that inside the space program, which has already been gutted by Obama, we've got an engineer who's trying to get $250 million together to send a robot, a humanoid robot, to the moon. This would cost much less than the $150 billion to have manned space travel. And this is a guy in NASA. His name is Stephen J. Altimus of the Johnson Space Center. This is what we're now reduced to. Will the Republicans come forward and do something to refund NASA, to put the United States back into the space race, or will they say, no, we can't do that? The New York Times of the same day, November 2nd, financial leaders still influential expect to be more so after next week. So Gary Gent, we've got Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein, and Ben Moshe of AIG. They all say they've been getting a lot from Obama, but now they expect to get more. So that's their reading on the so-called Tea Party. We've also got a very interesting thing. I just want to point to this quickly in conclusion. In the Wall Street Journal of today, November 5th, Katrina vanden Heuvel, limousine liberal, but in her article trying to denigrate the Republicans and all this is fine, but she says, University of Massachusetts economist Robert Poland and others argue the single most important reason for the failure of economic recovery is that private credit markets are locked up, especially for small business, and that the federal government could help by expanding existing federal loan guarantees by $300 billion. Well, why stop there? Why not force Helicopter Ben, using the fact that there are these people who claim to be from the Tea Party, they claim to be hostile to the Federal Reserve, judo the Tea Party hostility in the House against Bernanke. One thing would be to fire Bernanke. That would be a way to show you heard the voters, but you won't do that. To issue 0% credit for infrastructure and indeed for small business, because if you're a dry cleaner, if you're an auto repair shop, if you're any small business that produces anything, you're productive, you get 0% federal credit for production, if that's what's really involved. Of course, it's in many cases small business becomes a mask for all kinds of other stuff. The other thing, Dorothy Rabinowitz, Wall Street Journal, Tuesday, November 2nd, Election Day. Why Obama is no Roosevelt? Well, I can only agree, even though Ms. Rabinowitz is a notorious reactionary. We have Obama out there saying people are hardwired not to always think clearly when they're scared. Remember the bitter Klinger remarks. This is the detached, elitist anthropologist sent by the foundations to dupe and otherwise strip the American people. And she contrasts this to one of the masterful exercises of Franklin D. Roosevelt in late February 1942, February 23rd, 1942, when the Allied cause looked bleakest. We were reeling after Pearl Harbor. Rommel was on the march in North Africa. Hitler was at the gates of Stalingrad. It looked like an Axis victory up and down the line. The map speech. The president asked Americans to have a map at hand to follow me with the references I shall make to the world-encircling battle lines of this war. And he says, your government has unmistakable confidence in your ability to hear the worst without flinching and losing heart. Yes. The other thing from Roosevelt that has crept into the coverage this week, let's see if I can find the exact reference, is in the discussion on quantitative easing and the so-called monetization of debt. They have to concede that under Franklin D. Roosevelt, we had essentially a low-yield government securities standard where the Fed was chock full of government securities in the 1940s and up to the end of this in 1952. Those were years of tremendous economic progress. So remember, the only president who ever shackled and de facto nationalized the Federal Reserve as long as he was there was Franklin D. Roosevelt. So don't let those Roosevelt haters get you down. And we'll talk about strategies for regroupment, stop foreclosures, Tobin tax, no cuts in Social Security or the social safety net. 3 points that we'll be taking into demonstration